success is really the impact you have on others. That's going to be your legacy. I mean, you can make as much money as you want. You can be a selfish jerk and you can achieve success. But, if that's all inward focused, if that's not investing in the lives of others, then it's temporary. And it's certainly on a spiritual level, not everlasting. But whether you're spiritual or not, your legacy is really going to be through the effect you have on others. And some of that may be your children. In a business sense, it's mentoring others. In a personal sense, it's mentoring those around you. So that's how I define success. It's the lasting effect and amount of effect you have on other people, not on your own success.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
Entrepreneurs, leaders, and influencers, welcome to this episode of EQ for Entrepreneurs. Thank you all for watching, whether you're watching on our YouTube channel, EQ for Entrepreneurs, or listening to this on our podcast, EQ for Entrepreneurs. Thank you all so much for your continued support, your ratings, your reviews, your subscriptions, and your shares with your friends and family members that you feel, maybe even your colleagues or coworkers that you feel these episodes might also add value to. I'm really excited about this episode. This is another interview with one of my college classmates who is amazing. He has an amazing story. His name is Patrick Gray. He is an executive recruiter for C-level and board level executives. So like the highest levels of corporate America, this guy recruits. And you imagine that the skill sets and the emotional intelligence that is required to attract, recruit, and retain that level of executive or leader is phenomenal. We discuss some really interesting topics. We started off with some fun questions. Some real light kind of fun questions. What makes him unique, which is fascinating. I have never met anybody with this unique story that he's going to share with you all. So I'm really excited about that. He shares an excellent quote, favorite movie, how he defines success. Think about that. How do you define success? So Patrick shares how he defines success. And I hope you glean lots of insights from our conversation. And for those of you all that are serious about taking your EQ to the next level, please check out EQforentrepreneurs.com/EQA. EQforentrepreneurs.com/EQA. That'll put you on the waiting list for our upcoming course that starts at the end of this month. It's an 8-week course. Lots of content, lots of interaction and engagement that will help take your emotional health and emotional intelligence to the next level. Hope you enjoy the episode. Okay, what's up? Super duper entrepreneurs, leaders, and influencers. I am here with another one of my phenomenal, amazing classmates, Patrick Gray. Really excited to glean insights and wisdom from his background and experience. And just a quick background, and then I'll have him jump into some more details. His background is he is a force multiplier. What? In human capital and executive search consultant for the C-suite and board level executive, and his company does like from the VP on up, but that's kind of his specialty. And he's got a background, so he went to West Point as well. He was a military intelligence officer in the United States Army, so he's a veteran. And man, this would be like the first time I think we've connected since school. Now, for those of you all that are kind of new and familiar to emotional intelligence, let me just very briefly define emotional intelligence. It's 4 primary areas, and there are different camps and stuff that folks get into more details. But for me, I kind of keep it simple: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social management. So that's kind of the framework that we're going to be speaking from. But Patrick, man, I've got some rapid fire questions for you, and then we'll get into some more serious stuff. So Patrick, let's start off with this one. Who are you?
Who am I? Well, I mean, in addition to my professional career, which you just outlined, I am a father of 4, trying to be a golfer, and just trying to keep the body in shape as I get a little older. So exercise enthusiast, father of 4, husband, believer, and executive search consultant.
That's awesome. Love it. Love it. And you've got, like I told you before we started recording, you've got a beautiful family, and you've got some of your children, you've got a college student, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, our oldest is a sophomore, and then so they're spread pretty evenly, 11 to 20 or 12 to 20 now. But we didn't start a oops baby or a second family, so we're on the other side of the hump in terms of little kids.
Yeah, that's right. That's great. That's awesome. Okay, so hobbies. You kind of alluded a little bit. Exercise enthusiast. You want to break that down a little bit? What kind of hobbies do you have?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, golf, getting into it more as the kids get older. You can spend more time out of the house. Certainly in the pandemic, golf has been one of those activities we've been able to do more. Unfortunately, travel, my wife and I have traveled all over the world, even with the kids. So, I mean, there's been travel you can do in the US, but even that gets difficult. I read a lot, I'm not just a serious reader of biographies and stuff like that. I read a lot of just fun books. I don't read like science fiction or anything like that, but not all. Like I said, I'm not a business book person trying to find the latest management trick. I read a lot of historical biographies. I like reading books about great people in history.
Love it. That's great. So it's funny you picked golf as your sport for some crazy reason. I chose jujitsu. And at my age, I'm kind of wondering what on earth I was thinking.
Oh yeah. We ski a lot too when we can. Get into some more physical stuff. But in terms of just something you can do till you're 90, that would be golf.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You guys will have to come out and do some skiing and snowboarding with us in Colorado sometime, man. We'd love to have you guys.
Absolutely.
So tell me you're big reader. What's one of your favorite historical fiction books that you've read?
Yeah, I'll put it on a theme. I love reading not just bios, but stories about the English kings and queens, the royalty. I think there's a lot of, I don't want to put it back onto business, but there's just a lot of lessons to be learned about power, the use of power, how organizations operated. It was obviously a lot bloodier and personal back then, but I learn a lot reading those. They're not just interesting stories, but I learn a lot about people's view of how to exercise power and when they feel threatened and when they don't and how they react to it.
Yeah, great. Those are great points. And also culture, man, how much culture plays into, decision making and leadership and that kind of thing too. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's great. Okay, favorite music genre.
I used to be kind of a classic 90s guy, but I've actually gotten into just kind of not pop country, but traditional country. I've been listening to like Kenny Chesney and his radio station and stuff. I guess the more I get to know our classmate Cam and think about hanging down at the Floribama, I've been listening to that. It's good relaxation music, I think, too, where you can kind of have it going in the background and it's not going to, disrupt the business environment. And it does relax you. It's about being, in the sun and no shoes and sitting on the beach. So
That's great. Love it. I'm kind of I go back and forth, but I'm right now the phase I'm in is some good 70s chill,
Yeah.
little Simon and Garfunkel, kind of some chill tunes a little bit. Earth, Wind and Fire,
Yeah,
some
those are great.
Creedence Clearwater Revival, some old school stuff there. But I go back if sometimes I'm in an 80s mood and 90s, some country. Yeah, I mix the reggae, the whole nine
Oh
there.
yeah.
Okay, what's one thing that's unique about you?
Yeah. One thing that's very unique about me is I grew up on a hippie commune for half my childhood.
No way!
Yeah.
Are you serious? I did not know that.
Yeah, my mom and dad split, and my mom moved out to California and moved to a commune, and she moved my brother and I there when we were young. So
What was that
one of
like?
the few West Point guys I know that if I'm trying to remember the name, there was another guy from Ohio in our class who actually lived on a commune too, but I can't remember his name.
Dude, so what? Like, that's fascinating. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the the stereotypical free love dope smoking. I mean, it was a serious commune, and so we did things like tend the fields and pick up the chicken eggs, and people got together as a group and communal, so to speak. And you know and it wasn't a cult where you had kind of all sorts of strange, really weird stuff going on, but it was just strange. And I can't say that the kids that grew up on it and stayed there through their lives flourished when they had to go out into the real world, but it was very interesting. There were a lot of lessons to be learned. We were largely unsupervised, but in a much safer environment than being in a city, so we could be unsupervised to some degree.
Sure. Okay, got it. No, that's fascinating. Fascinating, man. That's
Yeah.
cool. How do you recharge?
um Not enough. um Yeah, I've gotten to the point now where to recharge, I've really found as I've gotten older, I need to take actual time away. It's not enough to just, you never get an hour anymore, especially with four kids, and this whole pandemic thing with work life being blurred. It's hard, and so I've taken, don't publish this on Facebook, but I've taken trips where I'll just go and play golf with a good friend, or I'll bring some of my kids, or I'll take my wife down to the beach, and even if it's 3 days, that's how I've found to recharge. Otherwise, getting out on the golf course for 4 hours is a good way, but it's got to be something where you're getting away from your obligations for a period of time, even if it's 4 hours. And you got to find a way to let go of your obligations. When I was younger, I'm sure you had it too. You obsess over, every minute of every day, and it's not healthy, and it's actually not good. And I think you're more productive if you can, if I could, go back to my younger self, I'd say it's okay to take a day off. It's okay to take time off. It's okay to tell people you can't do that because it's impinging on your recreation time.
Well, that's such a huge point, Patrick, because especially my wife and I have been eyeball deep in this whole emotional growth journey, growing emotional intelligence and stuff, and just how important taking care of yourself is.
Yeah.
Right? It's you actually decrease your combat effectiveness the harder you go. There's a point that you start to lose effectiveness and decision. Like for me, man, the more fatigued I am, I mean, I think,
Yeah.
Ranger school days, or even like you said, early lieutenant days, I'm like, oh, I'm hardcore. I haven't slept in a day, or I haven't slept in 2 days because I'm Mr. Hardcore infantry guy. But I was an idiot, because I'm getting dumber and dumber the more
Yeah.
fatigued, especially the age I am now. I can't do that anymore. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so,
that now it's hard. It's hard at this age to stay up till midnight even.
right, that's right, that's right. But I love that. I'm so glad to hear that you're making it a priority. Yeah, that's and I think everyone does. I think that if we can find out, that's honestly why I asked the question. If we can, it's part of self-awareness, right? Which is part of emotional intelligence. The more that you can figure out how you recharge as an individual, as a leader, as an executive or entrepreneur, whatever your background is, as a military leader, the more effective you'll be if you know how you recharge. Some people recharge around people, some people recharge alone, read books, PT, right? All those different things. I think that, and fortunately, I think that the pandemic has really helped for people to realize, man, how I've got more time to think. So how do I
Yeah,
recharge? And I think for longevity too, for in a career or profession, man, it's really important. Otherwise, again, like many military folks do or athletes do, they get burnt out. They get obsessed and consumed. And I'm going to train
absolutely.
7 days a week, and it's just not smart in the long run. Okay, favorite quote.
Picture it is hardships prepare ordinary people for extraordinary lives.
Love that. That's excellent.
So I think that's the old, that's the whole diamond analogy, right? You can be a piece of coal, and pressure and heat over a period of time creates a diamond.
Yeah, that's great. Which, again, it takes, I feel like it takes self-awareness to maximize those lessons in the valleys, in those hardships. Because I've seen people, man, and Patrick, I'm sure you've seen them too, but I've seen people that it's like they repeat the same lesson in the valley. It's like, dude, like you gotta learn. There's some things you gotta learn again, which takes self-awareness to figure out how to graduate to that next step. You know what I mean? I'm
Yeah,
sure you've probably seen executives that just keep repeating some of the same bad behaviors.
absolutely. Absolutely. They never learned. I mean, it worked
Yeah.
for them at one point in their career, and they think it's a playbook they can pull out no matter what and just keep using it.
Right. Well, or another great example is, how many military dudes like, okay, let me use my military authoritative style of leadership in the corporate world. It's like,
Right.
it's it doesn't work with civilians. Okay, favorite movie.
Oh, very good question. Actually, one of my favorite movies I just watched with my daughter is Chariots of Fire.
Oh, classic.
Yeah. Yeah, I
That's
think it's just a good example of obviously dedicated people, that all come at it from a different direction. You have the Eric Liddell, the religious Scottish runner. You have Harold Abrahams, who's the jittery, um, chip on his shoulder runner because he's Jewish in a English society. And anyway, and the Lord, who doesn't have to worry about anything, and he doesn't care whether he gets a gold or a silver. He just wants to be part of the crowd.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's great. I gotta bust that out. That's been
Yeah.
a long time. That's so many great lessons in that one. That's excellent. So kind of piggybacking on that, how do you define success?
Yeah, I mean that's a very open-ended question. I mean, at a macro level, I mean, success, in my view, is it's a self-definition. In terms of people need to define that for themselves, and success, for me, may look different than success for you. I mean, I think if you're breaking it down into particular areas in life, I mean, we have developed success factors around what does success look like. It's largely an externally driven definition at that point. There's the internal, what is a success for me, but then what is success for others looking at you, whether you're a leader in a church, whether you're a leader in a business, whether you're a father. I mean, what does success look like? We know what failure looks like, and I think people can definitely agree on failure because we all see it in every walk of life. But I think on the success side, there's the personal definition, but then there's the metrics. I mean, success in the business world is largely driven on even in the military, on rank. Where do you sit in the organization? What's your span of control? In the civilian side, it's obviously economic. How much money do you make? If you're a scientist, it may be how many patents you have. But I think success has to be somewhat objective, but anyone's personal success can be anywhere on that spectrum because success for me, I'm looking at succeeding in 6 different areas in any given day. And so, I could be very successful in my career and be we see these people complete failure as a father. And you're going to give and take on all those areas. So I think there are definite objective levels of, criteria for success. But I think in terms of someone's personal view of their success, it's got to be tailored and it's not if we only let the crowd decide, then it's always going to be focused on one area of someone's life versus the sum total of their life.
Yeah, love that. And that's a huge point that I want to elaborate on, because I think that many people don't take the time to really think, like, how do you as an individual define success? And we let the Joneses, neighbors, colleagues define, well, man, it's going to Harvard and whatever the path is that society says that I'm supposed to go. Well, who says that's the way you're supposed to go? Like you said, and this again, something I'm learning about emotional intelligence is a concept called boundaries. And I didn't know about this concept, for my entire life until just a few years ago. But like you said, can I have enough awareness of myself to say, okay, this is my definition of success, and still be happy with your definition of success. And if
Yeah.
ours don't look alike, that's fine. It doesn't have to look alike, right? And so, yeah, I think you're right. It does need to be personally defined. I just think that, my encouragement for folks that are listening is that take the time to answer that question for yourself, and don't let a boss or colleagues or a spouse or somebody else define that for you.
Yeah, I think where I've come to it recently, and I've read a couple of books on it, and one of them is extremely famous because it's probably one of the most read books of all time. It's The Purpose-Driven Life. And I think the first line in that is, it's not about you. And then I just read a more secular book about it. It's actually called It's Not About You. And it's called A Brief Guide to a Meaningful Life. And it's written by the guy who did Strength Finders, if you've ever heard of Strength Finders. And it's basically a secularized version of the purpose-driven life. And his definition, which I agree with, is, success is really the impact you have on others. That's going to be your legacy. I mean, you can make as much money as you want. You can be a selfish jerk and you can achieve success. But, if that's all inward focused, if that's not investing in the lives of others, then it's temporary. And it's certainly on a spiritual level, not everlasting. But whether you're spiritual or not, your legacy is really going to be through the effect you have on others. And some of that may be your children. In a business sense, it's mentoring others. In a personal sense, it's mentoring those around you. So that's how I define success. It's the lasting effect and amount of effect you have on other people, not on your own success.
Love that. That's excellent. Excellent, Patrick. I've heard it said this way: success is how many people's lives are better because you lived.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Is another way to say what you're saying. Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. Okay, can you share now, kind of getting into some more kind of emotional intelligence questions and stuff, and really kind of to get a macro picture of you as a leader. You've been a leader for sounds like many, many years of your life. So, from your childhood, can you tell us your story? How did you end up where you are today? How did you end up as a leader, and kind of what were some of those milestones throughout your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up in a very unstable family situation, moved around a lot, not because I was in the military or anything, just unstable family situation with not a lot of support or help. That really drove me to very high self-awareness and self-reliance. So very high self-awareness, very high self-management, not necessarily in a healthy way. You can be too self-reliant, right? But from a self-awareness standpoint, like, you have to be self-aware, because you don't have anybody around you telling you, you're learning it through trial and error, school of hard knocks in some respects. And so you can become very high self-aware that way, because you don't have people vested in your life that are like telling you, hey, you really shouldn't do that, or hey, that's not a good idea. So I just grew up in a very kind of neglected environment of, it's not like I had abusive parents, but just were tied up with their own stuff and didn't spend a lot of time, with me or my brother. And so that's helped me get where I am. It helped me to set goals and achieve them. It helped me to realize that if I didn't set those goals and I didn't work for them, I didn't have a lot of people around me that like, hey, Pat, I'm going to help you reach this goal. But it also led me to not ask for mentorship and help.
Oh.
And so from a leadership standpoint, that's kind of the negative consequences of it. It led to very low empathy. And so, people having problems, setting goals, achieving them, or, feeling like a victim because, somebody's not doing it for them, or my perception is that they're not doing it for themselves, led me those are the leadership failures on my side. So I think from the success side, very much high self-awareness, how to set goals, how to achieve them, really how to teach other people how to do it. But on the negative side of, not a lot of empathy, and kind of in many respects expecting people, to come ask help from me rather than me look at them and saying, what can I do to help them? Now, over the years, I've learned to kind of, how to fix those deficiencies. But that's kind of been my leadership journey is very much able to help people, achieve their goals, but not necessarily cutting them some slack or coming around to help them when they're faltering.
Got it. Wow. That's, that's fascinating. Just, what the positive and negative consequences are of all our childhoods, right? Because another thing that I like to say is that no one leaves their childhood unscathed.
Yeah.
Right. We all come out with some sort of emotional baggage and stuff, whether intentional, unintentional. And there's actually an actual dynamic for what you've experienced. And I've read a couple books on them, and we've all experienced it. But you shared it there and I appreciate your vulnerability and your transparency. It's called childhood emotional neglect. So it's not what happened to you; it's what didn't happen, right?
Oh,
So
yeah, interesting.
the nurturing and the empathy and the the development and the encouragement and boundaries and all those things that we a lot of times we need in childhood. Again, no one's a perfect parent, and so there. And like you said, and I again appreciate your vulnerability. There are consequences, right? There's
Yeah.
consequences for good and bad of our different respective childhoods and stuff. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I
Now,
think from,
go ahead.
West Point set a baseline for everybody. Obviously, West Point's designed to set, to bring in a bunch of disparate backgrounds and people and cultures, to set a baseline of what it means to be a leader. And, we've all been through the BS&L classes, and, we call those kind of BS, but, they are real in the sense that it brings in, at least for me, it said, there are models of leadership and there are different models to apply in different situations, and to be aware of those and realize that, there isn't, even in the military, there's not a formula, and you got to be prepared to realize, an equity model of leadership. These decisions can create equity problems, or these decisions can do that. So I think, West Point set a very good kind of mature baseline for me to develop as a leader. Not that I internalized it all then, but it did open my eyes, and certainly it sets a minimum standard. Nobody's going to graduate from West Point without just kind of a minimum standard of ability to lead people, communicate effectively, and stand up in front of people and not be not be shy. Now, there are some shy leaders in the Army, but there's a minimum standard there that you can expect from someone, not just West Point, but anybody who's going to be a lieutenant in the military.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how did you even like how did you get it in you? I guess where did your desire to achieve so highly come from? You're obviously a high achiever, high performer. How did you go from kind of a neglected childhood to, hey, look, I've got to bring myself up by the bootstraps, and I want to shoot for the stars there. How did you develop that?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is some people are born with a competitive nature and some people aren't. And you don't have to be uber competitive. You read stories about like Michael Jordan, and he'd be sitting around playing pool with his buddies in the basement, and he'd turn what should be just a relaxed pool game into the most uncomfortable game of pool ever. Like everything had to be competitive for him. So I'm not comparing myself to Jordan, but I certainly have always had a competitive edge in me. I mean, they're just people that hate to lose. And it bothers them. It doesn't have to ruin their life, but I've always, I obsess, and I'm not fun to be around when I lose. So I think you have to have some basic nature, and some people get it because they're in a family that breeds it into them or beats it into them. I didn't have that, so I've always had a competitive edge. But on the other hand, um, I think it's just fear of failure. It's just when you're growing up in a resource deprived environment without a lot of support, looking around, and you have certain goals in life. It's like, well, if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. I don't have a trust fund. I don't have even a middle class kind of family that's kind of guiding me. So, take that competitive edge with the fear of failure, but wanting to achieve more. And that's where I got it from, I think. And so for me, it was always, look, I don't think I'm the smartest, the best, the fastest, but if I'm going to go do something, like become, like when I was deciding, like, hey, maybe I want to go in the Army, the answer was start at the top, like try and get into West Point. If that doesn't work, well, go to ROTC or something like that. And so that's how I've always been, is shoot for the top, and if you don't make it, that's fine, but there's then you work your way down rather than starting from the bottom, like, what do I think I can do? It's more about, well, let me stretch, and see if I can reach that.
Sure. No, that's
And I
great.
think it's a work ethic, right? I mean, you have to have a work ethic, and once again, you can get that through, um, lack of resources, where, like, hey, your work ethic comes from the fact that you got to start working when you're 13, or not. But I've always had a work ethic.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Now, have you, based on your childhood, Patrick, have has there been a phase in your life where you're like, man, I would like to develop a support network, since you never really had one? Or have you kind of bootstrapped your whole, your whole career?
Yeah, I think that I think, like many military officers, if I had understood the power of networking and seeking out mentors earlier in my life, I'm not saying my life would have been a lot different, but it certainly maybe would have been a little easier, or there would have been opportunities there that I otherwise probably missed. That being said, I have benefited over the years, mostly post. Um, in the Army, I started to develop some mentors, or at least people started. When you're in the Army, like, people have a vested interest in you being successful, right? I mean, you work for them. If you were to go to war, they needed to rely on you and know that you could do your job. And so that's where my eyes really started to open up to, hey, people are interested in investing in me. And then in my search career post military, I really started to, kind of look for mentors, and have people, kind of, it wasn't like, hey, would you be my mentor? Yes, I'll be your mentor, but develop that kind of mentor mentee relationship. And now, at my age and where I'm at in my career, is really try and, be that to other people. So I think, part of it is the network, which is, I mean, a network is a 360 thing, but I always kind of look at the network as you're reaching out, for more peer-to-peer stuff. But I think the mentor-mentee relationship, and you can have more than one mentor, right, at one time, but having that mentor is also, extremely important to develop.
Such a huge point, Patrick, and I agree 1,000%. The other reason I asked that question, there's a phenomenal author that I've been studying a lot about. He wrote the book Boundaries and wrote a book called Changes That Heal, a guy named Dr. Henry Cloud. And one of the things that he talks a lot about and especially during COVID ops, is the importance of just any human being. But I would almost argue, especially for high achievers and leaders and stuff, to have a strong emotional support network, whether
Yeah.
it's, like you said, family, your spouse, your children, but also your friends and a community, your golfing buddies, or in my case, jujitsu buddies, or whatever,
Yeah.
my church buddies, that kind of thing. It's like, it's just been interesting to hear him talk about, like, it's not like a nice thing, it's a necessary thing,
Yeah.
almost, and I love what you said too about kind of taking it to that next step is not just for your own support, but now how can I pay it forward? How can I kind of look to pass on that
Oh,
next generation? That's great. So you being in kind of recruiting and in the search for executives for so long in your career, how much do you feel emotional intelligence plays into being a successful either executive recruiter and or even a networker? Because
yeah.
really they're very similar. I would maybe say, you got to have a decent amount of EQ to be successful in networking too. But how would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's kind of two sides to the executive search equation. There's the recruiting side, which is, the ability to recruit and first the ability to recruit somebody, understand why they're interested, why they'd be a fit, and whether they'd be a good fit for a particular client, particular company. Every company is, even in the, you have two companies in the same industry, they're going to be very different cultures and potentially leadership styles. So, that's the recruiting side. And I think, the best recruiters um, have very high emotional intelligence, self-awareness. I mean, they have to, because they're also judging other people's self-awareness. And they're judging whether people are, frankly lying to them. Are they, why are they interested? Are they interested because they want the job? Are they interested because they're about to get fired? Are they interested because they really just want to get to know you, not because they're interested in this job, but they might be interested in another job down the road? So I mean, I think, and then what are their levers for why they're interested, or how can you use those levers to help them get more interested? Is it a family thing? Is it a compensation thing? Is it a location thing? But the problem, the reason I say you have to have high self-awareness is, if you just go by what people tell you, they'll tell you anything to get you to be interested. But having high emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and then being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and ask the right question, you can really get to the bottom of somebody, whether they're know themselves, whether they're really interested, and if so, how are you going to close them when the client says, I want to hire this person? What are their hot buttons? What's going to get the deal done? Because these processes in executive search take 3 months to a year.
Wow.
And by the time you get to that offer stage, you've pretty much whittled down to one person. Rarely do you have a backup. And so if that falls through in the end, your client's angry, you're angry, the candidate may be angry, and you may have just damaged a relationship with a client at a very high level, a board, a CEO. And so that's where I think it plays. And the other side of it is, you're a salesperson at the end of the day. If you don't have any searches to do, you're not getting paid. And so, so being able to go out and sell. So, there's two sides of it. There's the recruiting side and there's the sales side. I have to sell search to the boards and C-suite of America. And so, everything you've learned in your life about what makes a good salesman, is true about a search person. And there are certainly salespeople with low EQ, low self-awareness. But when you're selling, to the C-suite, when you're trying to sell at that level to very senior, experienced leaders, they'll eat you up pretty quickly if you're not, a true kind of be an authentic salesperson.
Yeah, that's great. And it takes, yeah, it takes self-awareness and social awareness, man. Because you got to know, you got to be able to, through your questions, which is a whole nother skill set. But I think asking questions, it is impacted by one's emotional intelligence, because you can. I feel, because I love questions. I'm a huge question guy, and I feel like you can accurately assess somebody's emotional intelligence by the quality of questions that you ask.
Mm-hmm.
And the more effective you can ask those questions, and therefore assess where your candidate is at, you can, you can be more effective at making that match with the client and the particular candidate there. And so you do have to have a lot going on. And then you've got to have that, the self-management to know the right questions to ask. And, and again, when you're interacting with the boards and stuff, the social management after the awareness to be able to, effectively interact with those C-level guys to, kind of see things as you are, kind of casting that vision and stuff with a particular candidate. So that's fascinating. How do you feel, again, being in this industry for so long, almost 2 decades now, how important do you feel emotional intelligence is as an executive? So from a candidate standpoint, let's say I'm on this side of the table and you're recruiting me, for example, for a C-level slot or a board member slot. How important is EQ for me?
Yeah, I think it's massive. And you talked about the 4 quadrants. I mean, I think, look, you don't make it to a fairly senior level without being fairly good at self-management, right? And I think even at social management, even if you're not great at it, you got to have a minimum level, or you're just not going to make it above. Those are the people I think that get stuck at the mid-management level. They don't have that. Where I think it really plays in is self-awareness and social awareness, right? So from a self-awareness standpoint, you may be able to manage your behaviors, but if you're not very self-aware, you may not understand kind of why and when. And I think, look, when we are dealing with, because we don't only do recruitment, we do executive assessment, where companies call us in and ask us to help identify, let's say, do succession planning. I got 3 people, who I think could be a successor to this position. Can you tell me, kind of strengths and weaknesses, and then help them to, compensate for their weaknesses. And the biggest hurdle is usually self-awareness. And that's where we, as a search firm, I don't do it myself. That's where we recommend coaching, executive coaching. And it's usually around the self-awareness is, how can I manage others? How do I understand the impact that my regulated behaviors are having on others if I'm not very self-aware? And that's generally where I see, the biggest stumbling blocks, but also the biggest areas for improvement for people that feel that their careers have stalled. Usually we'll get them a coach, and the coach is the one that becomes the one that's their mirror and really is their self-awareness. They're the one putting themselves up to the mirror and saying, well, you may think you're successful, but, you've got some real, whatever, behavioral issues, or you've got some blind spots here that you're not aware of. And that's where I think why self-awareness is extremely important, and social awareness. So you can be self-aware, you can be able to self-manage, and you may be able in some ways to manage socially, but without social awareness. And I think we've seen examples of CEOs like that. They make a lot of money, they're hugely successful, they're able to manage their behaviors personally and well, maybe not always personally, but professionally. But they're what I call the managed CEOs. They're the ones that, they're busy from morning till night. They work, tremendous hours. They're in and out of meetings and on phone calls, but they're never, ever exposed authentically to any of their employees, right? We all have met those people. They're always busy, but they never have, interactions with employees or customers that aren't set up and managed for them in many respects. They can come in and act the way they need to do, but it's all it's all very cardboard.
Sure. It's almost like a performance, like a staged,
Yep.
kind of canned performance. Yeah. Wow.
We've seen that in the military with senior flag officers. Have you ever met the flag officer where they just go from meeting to meeting and all they're doing is briefed on a PowerPoint slideshow that's already been briefed up and down the chain of command before they walk in? There's no content in that meeting. That's just the final kabuki theater at the end of a very long process. But, any interaction you have with the leader, and it's not just the military, we have plenty of them in corporate America, where you walk away and you're like, that was the most sterile cardboard interaction I have ever had with that person.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And yeah. And one of the things that's fascinating is that kind of ties in with that great point that you just made is it's again, it's been fascinating for me to be on this journey the last, handful of years, because I was completely, the emotional clue bus drove by my house and I just waved. I never, I never got on this bus before. So I'm so excited to be on this bus now, because it's also fascinating how many people are successful. Again, we define however that is defined, but let's just call it, maybe culturally successful for unhealthy reasons.
Yeah.
Right. So the executive, the CEO, the entrepreneur that's always busy because they're seeking people pleasing. I'm a recovering people pleasing addict. Right. And so for me, the reason I was a high achiever is because I wanted to get that validation and affirmation. I want Patrick to think highly of me because I've hit whatever level in life or business or whatever. And so that's the other thing that's fascinating is we just see success in our society, just celebrate success, not necessarily emotional health. Right. And so, how many, and I just interviewed, I don't know if you know our classmate, TJ Brady.
Yeah. I don't know him well, but yeah.
Yeah. Super guy. He's a Hollywood writer.
Yeah.
Right, screenwriter for Hollywood, and he's around zillionaires all the time, right? Everyone's a multi-millionaire, and they got their big giant house in Beverly Hills and Laguna Beach, whatever. And he said, dude, and he said he's had some great bosses, but he said, man, there's a tremendous amount of unhealthy emotional people, and so again, I think that it's easy to get caught up in the trappings of success or life or the metrics of society. And there's a lot of hurting people out there, especially, again, like we've been talking about during the COVID era, the pandemic era. So many, like, suicide has gone up, depression has gone up, alcohol abuse, and
I've seen all that.
right, all this stuff has gone up. But we're talking about COVID and not talking about all these emotional health consequences of isolating people that are relational ultimately, on varying degrees. So anyway, fascinating. Okay. Can you share an example or story of someone? So I'm looking for two stories. Mm-hmm. One story of someone that you've recruited. Obviously you don't have to give names, but just someone that you've recruited that has demonstrated a high EQ, and somebody that has that you have interviewed or whatever that has demonstrated a low EQ that you did not end up, hiring or getting, a C-level job or something like that. So a good example of an EQ and a bad example of, a low EQ.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of examples of high EQ in spite of all the bad stories you can tell. Generally, your successful leaders take the WeWork story out of it. I think when you're talking about startups and founders that become wildly successful, they've never had to develop necessarily they haven't had the time and maturity of the crucible of moving up a corporate ladder to develop a lot of those behavioral norms. But I think from a high EQ standpoint would be, I recruited the CEO for Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' space company, and it's a very interesting job because they're part of creating an industry that doesn't exist other than the government did it before Elon Musk did and all these folks, but it's also highly technical and requires highly technical leaders that haven't necessarily grown up in the traditional leadership functions. And so, I recruited a fellow who, grew up in engineering, was an engineering leader. He was a chief technical officer, all those types of things. And, he really demonstrated a high EQ because he was able to transition from a very traditional corporate structure, i.e. Honeywell, where he was a senior leader, but he was a senior technical leader, into a role where he was CEO of a, new space company working for, what is now the richest man on the planet. And he wasn't back then, but he was probably the 8th richest person on the planet back then. And so, that's an example of someone who had high EQ. he's not a, and I'll just share that, nobody's a perfect leader today. I'm sure I'm not working for the company, but I'm sure he has his areas he can improve from a leadership standpoint. But you don't see a lot of technical leaders really make that transition. And he's been there, I don't know, 3 years. So, that's considered a successful placement. Not everybody we place stays, 10 years, 15 years. But, if you kind of make it past the 3-year mark, that it's been a successful placement and that executive has been successful.
That's great. That reminds me, before you share maybe an example of somebody with a low EQ, that reminds me of another one of our classmates, Justin Kramer. I interviewed Justin Kramer, and I don't know if you know him at all, but super dude, super guy, has a engineering background. I don't remember if it's electrical, I think maybe mechanical engineer. And now he is in charge of, I want to say it's 180 NASA scientists.
Oh, wow.
So, he had to make that transition from technical background to the people side, of the technical background, to kind of that both of those dynamics there. And I think it takes a special person to do that, because normally you typically stovepipe. If you're technical, a lot of times you're going to stay technical, but to be able to make that cross, I think it takes a lot of EQ to make that kind of leap and do it successfully. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how about an example of someone with a low EQ?
Yeah. I think a good example would be, I recruited someone from, a very well-known, one of the largest corporations in America, or at least used to be the largest. It's still very well known and large, but probably on the market cap scale today might have even been the largest company in America at some point in its life, but today it's not. But it's still very well known, very big, very, very much known for its process, even to the point where there was no uniform, but pretty much everybody dressed the same every day and did through their career, and very well respected and very well known in terms of an innovative company that turned out good leaders. But I recruited this person to a much smaller company. So think, let's say 40, 50 billion in market cap down to 2 billion in market cap. A company that, it has process, it has structure, it's publicly traded, but still in smaller companies, it's not as much about process and legacy as much. There's a lot more about relationship and informal process. And so, while recruiting this person, and you could even say that this was a part of a low EQ miss on my side, because, I talked to the person about what it's like to transition from this company to that company, and the types of tasks that they'll be responsible for, the size of the organization that they'll be responsible for, the amount of resources that they'll be responsible for. And a lot of it is just the whole, the old saying, are you ready to roll up your sleeves? It's not like you don't work hard where you're at, but you've got a large organization to draw on, and you have 50, 60 years of company legacy and process and norms of, everybody kind of knows what they're doing already. You go to this company and you've got less people, less process, and less culture and legacy. And, I know what I'm doing. This is going to be great. I've been in positions, even at this big company, I was in positions where I had to do stuff like this. And, and I'm interviewing the person and agreeing with him, obviously, because he transitioned to that company. And I won't mention either because he's there today. He's only been there 9 to 10 months. And my clients already called me up and said, yeah, we're going to have to make a change. And really what the way that it exhibited itself is he got into this new company and he's acting like he's still at the old company. You can't meet with him unless you set a meeting on his calendar. And of course, his calendar is so busy when you're like that, if you want to meet with them, it's going to take you 48 to 72 hours. Whereas this company is very informal. People keep their doors open. CEO, you want to talk to him. You may not be able to talk to him the next day or two, but if his door's open and you're walking by, you can say hi. And so, that was two sides of the equation. That was an executive that had low self-awareness, meaning he thought he could do that, but probably late at night after he leaves this, gets pushed out of this company, late at night, he's going to realize that, he didn't know he thought he could make the transition, but he couldn't. And that's a miss on my part of not picking up, that, hey, this probably isn't the right guy for the job, or right gal. But in this case, it was a guy that I thought could do that, but probably I missed some cues along the way that I could have picked up. And that's kind of the low EQ side. That's the low self-awareness, and it manifests itself on the social side, because now that he's in this small company, he doesn't have the social awareness and the management to be able to change his style to meet what's going to be successful in the new environment.
That's huge. That's such a great point. And what's fascinating is in a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's kind of a more general book. It's a kind of a good intro book into emotional intelligence, and it said 68% of people are not able to identify how they're feeling. So almost 70% of people. And then to tie it to an executive level, there's another great book called Leadership and Self-Deception. Phenomenal book by the Arbinger Institute. Phenomenal. Highly recommend it. And they interviewed 10,000 executives from this massive company, 10,000 executives. 90% of the executives placed themselves in the top 5%. Right. So, again, to your point, so in this particular example, this gentleman, he was not able to be self-aware enough, and then self-management to adapt. And then, like you said, he didn't have the social awareness to be like, well, what culture is this new that I have to adapt to? I can't change this company to meet my, right. I've got to adapt. And it takes social awareness to see the cues and study the culture and fit. And ultimately now it's not going to be a fit. It sounds like in this scenario. And I think there are a lot of people in that scenario, right? I mean, in the military, right? How many times it's like, dude, you were a round peg in a square hole right here. Like you've got to be able to adapt and figure out the cultural norms of where you're fitting into, because you're not very popular. You know what I mean?
And I think, people get, people get frustrated. They need to make a change. They want to make a change. Maybe they feel like their career is stalled out in their organization. This new opportunity is, and look, I've done it. But looking back, I've realized like, hey, that was a great opportunity. It just wasn't a great opportunity for me. And having the self-awareness to be able to make that evaluation. And frankly, that's why people pay me to do what I do. Like I like to think that, okay, that was a miss, but 9 times out of 10, I'm going to pick up on it. But that's, that essentially that's one reason why we as a industry exist. I mean, we are not cheap. An executive search costs a lot of money. And so, what are you getting for that? It's not just a person, it's not just a staffer, going out and kind of funneling resumes over the shoulder to, hey, we need a CEO. Okay, here's 6 resumes. There's very much that whole evaluating people's emotional intelligence, their leadership capabilities, and then being able to project that into a new culture, a new company, a new environment. And that's the voodoo nature of it. There's a lot of assessment models out there. You can use the Hogan model, you can use, whatever the model is, but that kind of tells people where they've been and where they're at. But how do you then project that forward into, well, they were successful as CEO there. Are they going to be successful there?
Yeah, that's excellent. That's great. That makes me think of another concept, just somebody's leadership agility, right?
Yeah.
As the further and further we get into the technology and just how fast our world is changing with tech and everything else, we've got to be mentally and emotionally agile to be agile as a leader. If you've got a fixed mindset, and I love that you had said early on that you do a lot of reading. I think, man, to be successful in the future, you've got to have a growth mindset. If you've got this fixed mindset And again, I would argue if you're not emotionally healthy, you're going to have a tough time pivoting with the new culture of this company that you're going to, or this new team that you're going to have to be running, or that kind of thing. So,
Well, think about the high-profile flameouts we've seen recently. Uber, WeWork. I mean, even to some extent, and it's a tragedy, the Zappos leader. Now, he left before he flamed out at Zappos, but he clearly had some personal demons and serious behavioral issues. And it's not just the startups or the tech companies. I mean, you look at, in my industry, the aerospace defense industry, you've had massive ethics scandals around government contracting. And, I forget the name of the fellow, but about 3-4 CEOs ago at Boeing, the CEO was having a relationship with, with internally with like a administrative assistant, or even at the Lockheed, the heir apparent at Lockheed, the CFO. Now he's recovered and he's a senior executive in another company, but not front page, but Wall Street Journal stuff. He was going to be the next CEO of Lockheed. Comes out he was having an inappropriate relationship. Not just passed over to be the CEO of Lockheed. Had to leave the company, and so you see those things in industries big and small.
Military, right? I mean, military.
Yeah.
We see it. And that's a whole nother ball of wax, because I think that if we had a more emotionally healthy and more emotionally intelligent soldier and leader, a lot of those issues there'd be a lot less of those issues. I'm not saying it would solve all the problems, but I know, just because of the impact it's had on me personally, I think that it would take care of a lot of those issues. But when you have emotionally unhealthy people, a lot of times our coping mechanisms are also emotionally unhealthy, right? Or we'll take that unhealthy or unproductive, inappropriate coping mechanism or response, when, man, if we had just changed our own emotional health, we could handle stuff a lot more healthy than you know what I mean?
Yeah, look, that's self-awareness, and it's on the personal side, but the personal affects the professional, and there is a line there to some degree, but they do blur over. There's no question.
Yeah, 100%. One thing, and I'm a cheesy quotes guy, and one of my favorite cheesy quotes in this EQ space is and I've read it in a zillion books, but hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by people. Emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally.
Yeah.
And another one is pain and bitterness that's not transformed will be transferred somewhere else in your life. So for me, I was raised as an emotional stuffer and avoider. So we stuffed and avoided in my family of origin, in my childhood. We'd yell and scream at each other and then stomp off into our respective corners of the house and then come back an hour later and act like nothing happened. So there was no conflict resolution. So I learned my entire childhood how to just stuff and avoid, and absolutely clueless about how to do conflict, handle conflict with any type of health or productivity. I had no concept of health, right? And so, again, and I just, and not knowing any of the way, I thought, okay, I'm just going to keep stuffing and avoiding for my whole life. Well, that's kind of how we even started this whole EQ journey. Is I started to lash out at my wife. Like, I yelled at my wife 3 times in a span of a month, and she's like, dude, number 1, don't ever do that again. Right? Number 2, you've never done that before. So number 3, that means something's wrong with you. Like, what's up with you? Right. Yeah. And I'm like, man, that's a great point. Man, that's a great question. So then we went to counseling, and our counselor introduced me to this revolutionary concept called feelings and emotions. Right. I'm like, whoa, what are these new things you speak of? Right. And so, and again, it's all fun and games when we can handle stuffing it, but that cute, furry little monkey eventually outgrew my ability to hold on to it, and it turned into an 800-pound gorilla, and he I couldn't control him anymore. So, okay, now kind of wrapping up here, Patrick, This has been awesome. What resources have contributed the most to your own emotional health personal growth and development, leader development, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I do think there is real benefit to, reading and taking assessments, and not just, saying, oh, I mean, I'm not talking about personality assessments. I'm not talking about Myers-Briggs. I mean, those can be helpful on the self-awareness side. There's no question. And I think those are helpful. But I think, if you're really trying to assess from a career standpoint, where am I as a leader? And what are my strengths and what are my blind spots? I mean, there are some good assessment tools out there, whether, like I said, it's a Hogan or others. I think those can be very helpful. Strength Finders is a good one. Because, once again, we can know we're an introvert or an extrovert, or we're a judger or we're a thinker. And that can help you kind of figure out, yourself and your, your, I don't know, your personality. But from a business standpoint, I do think, you mentioned the word agility. Well, how agile am I? Because leadership can be learned. I mean, I don't believe, I mean, there are people who just kind of have natural charisma, if you will, but that doesn't make them good leaders. It just makes people are drawn to them. Well, that's great to say that people are drawn to you, but if you don't know how to lead, then you just got a lot of people that are rallying around you at that point. And so I think leadership is a learned and can be taught skill, and it can be self-taught to some degree, meaning you can find out kind of your strengths and weaknesses as a leader and get better. So I think that's it. So I don't. I've used a lot of proprietary assessment models. I mean, every large search firm has one, like Korn Ferry, where I worked years ago. I just left Heidrick and Struggles. They have their leadership assessment model. But I would just say, look, don't get a quack one, but there are plenty of them out there that are well respected. You can do your research. And the other thing I'd say is 360 feedback is the ultimate. When we do executive assessments, and they're very expensive. I mean, a company will pay us to do an executive assessment. It'll be $10,000 to $20,000 per person. And part of it is the assessment, which is, let's say, Hogan. But the most powerful part of it is, and the part that validates it, and really the part that brings it home to the executive, because every executive who's made it to a certain level, or even us who were in the Army, we've taken 4 personality tests in our life, and we've taken a leadership assessment, and we read them and we look at them as like horoscopes. We're like, oh yeah, that kind of describes me. And then you read another one and you're like, oh, that kind of describes me. And just like with horoscopes, you focus on the good stuff it's telling you, and you don't focus on the bad stuff. But I'll tell you, a 360 assessment, a true 360 assessment, and I'm not talking a 360 assessment where you're giving the people for them to talk to. I'm talking about you've agreed to do a 360 assessment. I'll decide who I'm going to go talk to. That is the most powerful tool, I feel. For someone making a decision about someone, to understand them, and B, if someone is kind of paying lip service to assessments and their leadership style, that'll hit it home. I mean, that's like if you could go home to your wife and say, okay, no filters, honey, tell me what's wrong with me. And she actually took the filters off and told you everything right then and there. I mean, you're going to get a better picture of who you are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I would say, look, assessments, reading management books, no question about it. If you really take them to heart, I mean, you can't read Good to Great and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and then read this one and read that one, and then you got to apply them, but you also just can't take the latest flavor of the day and apply it for a period of time and then read another book and apply it. But I would say the assessments and the 360s are most important. If you're looking to improve your self-awareness and understand your leaders, where you are as a leader, and then find some development tools. They could be coaches. Some people respond to coaches. It could be a self-improvement plan. It doesn't always have to be an external person. Or obviously I'll say this, I'm not a counselor, but if you got serious emotional baggage and you got personal stuff to deal with, go get a counselor. But I think the 360 is it.
Excellent, Patrick. I love all those, up to and including a counselor, because again, none of us leave our childhood unscathed, right? We all have emotional baggage that most of us have not ever dealt with. We just, again, have learned to cope or stuff and avoid. And so I love all of those. That's excellent. Something else too, for the maybe the non-corporate leader that is just looking for a tool, another great idea is there's a tool called a Google form that you can create a survey, and you can create your own kind of questions,
Yeah.
send that out to friends, family, and just have them fill it out anonymously without putting their name, so they can really speak freely, and can also provide some feedback. If you are looking now, here's what I found too over the years of doing 2 decades of coaching and mentoring folks too. When some folks say, "Hey, Patrick, man, can you really, can you give me some feedback?" And then you do, and their immediate response is defensiveness, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you were clearly not looking for feedback. You were just wanting your ego stroked.
Yeah. Affirmation.
Right. That's right. So, but if you're genuinely looking for some real feedback, I think that's an excellent idea. That 360 feedback is so powerful. And I've heard, the Army's, I guess, been doing that now for a hot minute, and it's been very powerful for a number of people. Another guy interviewed, full board colonel. He said one of the first times he got smacked in the face was from 360 feedback for his unit. And he was like floored, like, wow, I had
Yeah.
no idea I was coming across that way. And he said that was a milestone in his leader development. And it's the gift of truth, the gift of real, like you said, unfiltered truth, when we're not, and obviously and I think there is a skill in delivering truth too, in a way that's
Yeah.
safe and effective, so that you don't get defensive, or you don't, put your guard up or whatever. I think that is also a skill that can be developed as well. But that's excellent. Any final thoughts, advice, or encouragement to somebody that is wanting to grow as a leader, as an influencer, as an entrepreneur, as an executive, that you haven't already shared? Because I love that feedback that you've already said there. Any
Yeah.
final or additional thoughts on that, or
I mean, I
encouragement?
just think, emotional intelligence and all that is where you can move the needle on leadership. I think the most, and really on your career, aside from communication skills. And a lot of times those go hand in hand. But, Elon Musk came out recently and talked about the negative side of MBAs running companies. And in many ways, I agree with that. Not in all ways, because I think an MBA does give you valuable skills and an education. But the point being is, if you're just trying to run a company, but you're not focused on the business, you're really not, you're kind of a cardboard leader. But I think from an EQ, emotional intelligence standpoint, that is where I think most people can move the needle on their career. And I think your comment on agility, every leadership model coming out right now is about agility. Um, you know, History does repeat itself, but there's no doubt it's moving faster. And so the most agile leaders are going to be the most successful. And I think, so if you can figure out, kind of do an assessment of your own EQ, where you need to grow, whether it's more on the self-awareness side or the social side. Obviously, there's probably going to be blind spots on both, but find your blind spots and improve those. But also, um, check your communication skills, because you and I have all seen quote unquote great leaders, successful leaders that are horrible at communicating, and communicating is really where a lot of it happens. There's got to be a baseline of technical competence there to be in the job you're doing, but beyond that, what separates people is really their leadership agility and their communication effectiveness.
Love it. That's excellent, Patrick. Thank you so much, bro. How do we follow you? How do we, follow you or connect with you, or,
Yeah,
find
the
out
best
more?
way is really LinkedIn. We as a lot of people are out there on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I mean, I don't really tweet that much, but, from a business standpoint, when I'm posting stuff, I post quotes. When I'm posting articles, it's all on LinkedIn. It's all kind of on the professional side. I mean, if you're out there and you're one of our friends or family and you want to connect with me, you want to know what's going on in my life, that's Facebook. I don't share my entire personal life and family life on LinkedIn, but that's where I really focus my professional activities.
That's excellent. So for any of you guys that want to find out more about Patrick, and I'm pretty sure you've even written some articles and stuff
Yep.
about recruiting and that kind of thing, and various things in the corporate space. I will include the link to follow Patrick on LinkedIn in the show notes. And then the books that he's referenced and stuff, I will also put in the show notes as well. Patrick, thank you so much for your time, man. This
Thank
is
you.
so great connecting with you, brother.
Yeah, we'll be out there. No doubt about it. We'll be in the area.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you so much. Have a great day, brother.
You too. Thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
man. Bye-bye.